Hi y'all, this is Mrs. D and I'm here with an adding fractions video. So let's go ahead and get started with the steps. Whenever we're adding fractions, we first want to start out determining if it is a fraction with a like denominator or an unlike denominator. Now these can also be called common denominators or uncommon denominators, so you'll hear both words throughout the video. So let's start with the fact that we might have a like denominator. If you have a like denominator, that means that both numbers in the denominator, which is the bottom number of a fraction, are going to be the same. So in this case, I'm adding 1/4 plus 3/4, so they both have a 4 in the denominator. The other option is an uncommon denominator, and you'll notice here in the other fractions, we have 1/4 plus 2/3. So one fraction has 4 in the denominator, one fraction has 3 in the denominator. Once you've determined if they are common denominators or uncommon denominators, then you can decide what to do to solve it. So on step 2, whenever we're adding fractions, we need to find out if they have a common or like denominator, what we're supposed to do. And in this case, we're going to add the numerators and keep the denominator. So let's go on and look at what this would look like. If I have 1/4 plus 3/4, my denominators are both 4 already, so I don't have to do anything to find a common denominator. I'm going to add my numerators, and that's the top number, so 1 plus 3 equals 4, and my denominator stays the same. So my answer ends up being 4 over 4. Well, 4 divided by 4, or 4 out of 4, equals 1. So I can just change this number to equal 1. So that means that 1/4 plus 3/4 equals 1. Now, after we have determined if it's a common or uncommon denominator, what if they're not common denominators? So in the third step, if they have uncommon denominators, we're going to find a common denominator or a like denominator. Then we're going to match our numerator by multiplying by the same number on the top and the bottom. Then we're going to add the numerators and keep the denominator. So the last step is the same once we have common denominators. So let's talk about how we find that. So here we have unlike denominators. One of them is 4 and the other one is 2. So we have to find out between the 4 and the 2 what number they have in common. Normally, we would go by the multiples of 4 and see which one the 2 would go into. But the easiest thing to start with is to look at the larger number in your denominator, in this case it's 4, and then see if the smaller denominator goes into that number. 2 goes into 4 evenly, so we can use 4 to be our common denominator. So that means that we're going to have the denominator change to 4 for both fractions. Now the first fraction, 1/4, already has a 4 in the bottom. So I'm just multiplying this and the top by 1. And so 1 times 1 equals 1. On the other side, I'm increasing the 2 to go into 4 by multiplying times 2, which means I also have to multiply times 2 on the top. 2 times 1 is 2. So as you can see, I've changed this denominator 1/2, 2 in the bottom, to be a 4 instead, but I haven't changed the value of my fraction. 1/2 is still equal to 2/4. Think about a pizza. If I have 1/2 of a pizza, that means I'm going to have an entire pizza cut into 1/2, which means there are 2 halves that make a whole. If I cut that pizza instead into 4 pieces, 2 of those 4 pieces is still half of the pizza. So therefore, 2/4 is still equivalent to 1/2. It's still talking about the same amount of pizza. So now that we have determined our new fractions with common denominators, those are the ones that we're going to add together. So let's go back to the same process. We're going to add the numerators and keep the denominator. So 1 plus 2 in the top here equals 3. The bottom, the denominator, stays the same. There's still one more thing we have to talk about, because whether we have unlike or like denominators, sometimes our answer might be big and we can reduce it, which means we can divide the top and the bottom by a common number. The answer can also be an improper fraction, which means we would have to change it to a mixed number because we don't want the top number in our fraction to be bigger than the denominator. So let's go ahead and look at a way that we can do this. So first we're going to practice here by going through and finding like denominators. So Out of my two numbers, 6 and 3, I know that 6 is the larger denominator. And then I do know that 3 goes into 6 evenly. So that means that 6 can be my common denominator. So now I have to make sure that both my numerators are going to change by the same value. And so here, 6 times 1 means on the top I'm going to do 5 times 1. 5 times 1 equals 5. For the other side, 3 goes into 6 2 times, so I also have to multiply my numerator times 2. 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, once I have those common denominators, I can go ahead and add those together. So we're going to add the numerators. 5 plus 4 on the top equals 9, and then 6, my denominator, stays the same. So there's a couple of things here we want to look at, and what we said a minute ago is that we need to reduce it if it can be reduced, and then if it's improper we need to change it to a mixed number. Well, this fraction happens to be able to do both. If I look at 9 and 6, they both have a common number, and that would be 3. So I can divide both the top and the bottom by 3. I end up with the answer 3 halves. Well, 3 halves is an improper fraction because this numerator, 3, is bigger than 2 in the denominator. So now I have to go through and I have to change this answer to be a mixed number. What that means is I want to find out how many times 2, the denominator, goes into 3, the numerator. 2 goes into 3 one time, and whenever it goes in one time, I have one number remaining, so that remainder goes on the top, and then my 2 in the original fraction denominator stays the same. So 5/6 plus 2/3 in our original problem adds up to equal 1 1/2. Let's go ahead and recap these steps here. So first, we want to determine if the fractions have like denominators or unlike denominators. Second, if the fractions have common or like denominators, then we're going to add the numerators and keep the denominator. 3, if they have uncommon denominators, we're going to find a common denominator and then add the numerators and keep the denominator. But obviously we also have to change our numerators to match so our values are still equivalent. So those are the 3 basic steps to adding fractions. When you're finished with your answer, you always want to make sure it's reduced to its smallest amount and that it is not an improper fraction. You might have to change it to a mixed number. If you still need more help, after you watch this, you can watch it a couple more times if you need to, pause it and maybe go through some of the problems yourself. Then be ready to ask any specific questions about the process if you still need help. This is Mrs. D signing off, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.